Welcome back everybody, Rob Marzullo here, Ram Studio Comics, and today's video is going to be on adding shadows to your comic book faces. This can be a tricky topic at times, and there's a lot that needs to be covered when you're doing this, but I'll try to go ahead and cover as much as I can and give you a bit of a head start when you're trying to accomplish your shadowing for your comic book faces. Now I'm using Manga Studio 5 EX and showing the interface here, but keep in mind that you can use any type of software you have or traditional methods. This video isn't going to be software specific. I just figured I would show the interface for any of my fellow Manga Studio fans out there. And I've already started with a couple warm-up samples to kind of get ready for the process, and I'll show you those now. There's an uplight on the girl's face there, uplight on the male's face there. And the way that I do that, and then I go back and obviously ink over top if I want the really dramatic dark lines. But the way that I do that is I'll create a new layer. I use a variety of brushes, but I'll grab the dark pencil brush and set the opacity real low. So it basically gives me something like this. And let's say we want, I'll do the uplight real quick and I'll explain the process. So you've got this dramatic uplight on the face, and you want to do a couple things. You want to round out the form overall, so you want to look at it as one big shape. So I'll start with that. I'll just kind of block in some larger overall shadows. So say that I have this huge, shadow across the top of the hair. And then say I've got this large shadow on the form of the face, large shadow around the back of the ear. So at first I'm just kind of throwing in these big kind of ugly shapes of shadow to kind of place the basic light source. And then from there I want to start thinking about what it does to the smaller forms. So one of the places I'll start with, I'll do the nose here. So say there's an uplight on the base of the nose like that. And that could, that could happen. It could happen like this, or maybe more like that, something like that. So you want to play with the shapes and kind of keep going back and forth and see what really sticks. A good way to do it is just, if it looks wrong and you don't know why, to keep changing. I know that sounds a little bit obvious actually, but and also sometimes tedious, but you just have to do that. I mean, you're not always going to be able to find reference for every exact shot. So what you want to do is train your eye to just see things that are not right and then go back and edit. And then past that, sometimes you just gotta live with something too and just get it done. So it's all that kind of combined. So we'll say that this shape of shadow is what we want for the nose right there. And then depending on the intensity of the light source and how far under the character it is, the shadow, at first I was thinking the shadow would just go to say here, right? And as I pulled reference and kind of looked, I noticed that actually a lot of them will go all the way up the nose. It's almost like the nose stands out just far enough, and if the light source is low enough to the face like this, it'll push that shadow all the way up the nose, which I thought was interesting. So it's looking at your reference and kind of taking note of things like that. So now the brow would be something like this. If you really want to show his age and some detail, you can do each one of those kind of wrinkle patterns on the forehead. And also keep in mind that you don't want to do that as much of that with the female characters, unless you're trying to, again, show age. So now the eye would basically block and create a shadow above the eye like this, and it would block the eyelid. Something like that. This part of the mouth would kind of shadow back like this. Let's see, the bottom lip would be in shadow. Something like this. All this would be in shadow. A lot of the mouth inside, all that would be in shadow. Probably all of it, but we'll see. And I also want to show you to keep in mind that, block this stuff in, get it down, kind of look at it objectively, and then you can go back and just paint some of it back with white, or just hit the erase and erase it back. So the main thing is just to get in there and do it, you know, doodle around and do it. Keeping in mind that even these flicks of hair are going to cast a shadow. So you do this separation effect in the shapes of the hair, and all the parts that look raised, they're going to cast a shadow above them. So we'll say something like this. The ear is going to probably shade into here more, here, something like that. The jaw is probably going to have a little bit of a shadow back here, and there's probably going to still be a bit of a shadow from here. It's almost like you can almost use perspective lines too. So say you have a light source here. If you really need the helping hand, you can do like one of these numbers and draw perspective lines to see where how the light might affect the shapes. So for instance, if the light's down here, then maybe that collar is going to even cast a shadow like this onto the neck. So something like that. Remember that the collar should have wrinkles in it. It's not a solid shape. I always got to remind myself of that for some reason. Okay, so what else? Oh, duh, the cheeks. I was wondering why this form wasn't looking very rounded yet. Very impactful. There's going to be a pretty big shadow across the cheeks. And this is what gives you kind of that spooky. I always think of this as like the spooky, eerie look, you know, when the shadows on the top of the cheeks like that. Something about that just makes me think it's more eerie. And then from there, you just keep fine-tuning it. I would say we have the basis of the larger shapes of shadows in there, and then you just want to keep tweaking it. Like if you want a really detailed rendition, then you're going to maybe get into the wrinkles and do the same types of shadows. But all you're really doing is focusing on the light source being at the bottom of the character, it affecting each thing in the way that the shadow would be on the opposite side of it, and cast shadows from the bulk of each object. So now the other thing to think about is this, like say the nose, for instance. We have it where it looks like the light's shooting straight up, and maybe you're getting this effect where everything's shadowing directly up on the face. But a lot of times the shadow is going to be offset to one side. It's not going to be directly under unless he's holding a flashlight under his face or something. So it's good to keep in mind that like the nose shape here, chances are it's going to do another shadow where it blocks some of the eye like this and some of the cheek. You know, so a few things are going to happen there when you offset the light source. Maybe there's more of a shadow on the side of the face along with this. You know, something like this. You know, and that's just where experimenting around with these. Oh, and I forgot the chin here. There's going to be a large shadow like that. So it's starting to look a little bit more shaded, I think, anyways. All right, so let's consider that enough to get us to the next stage. You know, I can even fill in a little bit of my crosshatch line work. I'll do a little bit of that in here when I kind of take this to finish. You know, not a whole lot, but enough to give it a little bit more effect. Okay, so there's one light source, the upshot. Let's come over here to the damsel now, and let's add another layer. And I don't want to do an upshot because I've already done that with this character. Let's try a downward angle light. So let's say that our light source is up to the left side here. Just call it light source. Like that. And let's start off. The first thing I see is this large bulk of hair. Now keep in mind that I could just do the shadow with the same shape of the hair. And although that works, it looks a bit flat against her forehead, and this is why. that is casting this shape, but by the time this shape hits her forehead, it's going to round with the shape of her face, her forehead, like that. So see how that looks a little bit more impressive than the first initial part that I put down. Now over here, you're going to get that shadow, but you're also going to get the shadow from her brow. So it's going to come down and do more like this. I'd probably leave a little bit of light on the eyelid, but maybe not much. I'll fill that in for now. And again, the shadow from here against the cheek, but it's also going to round with the face. And the thing to keep in mind when adding shading to the female figure is everything should be a nice smooth, like for instance, say I want a shadow over here on the side of her face. I'll do a nice smooth transition. Now that's a little bit based on style as well, so you have to make that choice if you want an organic feel or a kind of a technical, maybe you want this kind of rigid angular effect, so that can be a style choice as well. So that's up to you. For the sake of this video, I'll go ahead and do the kind of smooth rounded form like this. A good way to do that is actually just draw the entire shape with one pull. You'll get a more of an organic feel to your line. Okay, so now the shadow off the nose. Now keep in mind too, unless you're trying to really add some drama to the scene and the character, that you don't want to have too many shadows on the female face. It just, you'll notice in comics you almost never see it, and I think it's because it just tends to take the softness and the appeal out of the face. But if it's a night scene or a scary scene or something, then I think it needs that. It adds the drama to the scene that you want. But keep in mind, you just want to be very subtle with it and not go too crazy. Okay, so now I'd picture all this part of the hair back here being in shadow. It also is a nice way to frame the face. So you could leave a little bit of lines back there to show the texture of the hair. And fill a lot of this in. It's going to be a nice heavy shadow from the head to the hair. And then again, the shapes that are protruding out from the hair, like I picture this being a larger bulk of hair kind of sitting out front, that's going to have a nice big cast shadow onto the rest of the hair. And you just kind of repeat that process. So you find the areas that you think are sitting out further, and those are going to create a cast shadow. And I'll actually size the brush up pretty large when I'm shading hair to get the initial bulk of the shadows down. It speeds up the process. This will pretty much all be in shadow minus any little highlights that I draw back in. Nice large shadow on the side of the bulk of the hair there to push that form up. Again, finding these strands and kind of dropping in the cast shadow. And then just a little bit for separation. Even where the light source is, you're still going to want a little bit of line work in there for separation. And you can probably block in a lot more of this into full shadow. Okay. So now as far as the jawline, I would say, again, you can trace the shape of the jawline, but then by the time it gets over here, you want to envision that it's also merging with another shadow from the neck, something like that. Okay, and then also the shadow from the eyes, something like that. And what else? Probably a little bit more shadow on the lip right here. Yeah, something like that. So And actually, you know what? Probably a little bit of shadow against the other side of the neck from all that hair. And forgive me if this this isn't exactly the way that you would do it. I think a lot of this is very experimentation, very experimental. So you just have to try and see what works well with your style and what you see as being correct. And always study your photos, you know, especially when it comes to shadows. Or I basically look at it like this. Like, I don't study photos all the time, probably not as much as I should, but if it's something I just don't understand, photos are the first place that I go. And that means taking my own photos, Googling it, whatever I got to do. But if I don't understand it, I'm going to a photo. For instance, sceneries and like cityscapes and things like that. There's just so much detail work in there, and it's so easy to forget a lot of that stuff that it's just great to use photo reference. I'm not saying to trace the photos, but I'm just saying to look at them, absorb that information, and then redraw it. And definitely do that with shadows, if shadows are something that you don't feel as confident with. So anything you don't feel as confident with your art, go right to photo reference, study it, recreate it, and you'll eventually get it. You'll eventually start to see the patterns that form. Okay, so there's, what do we have? We have an upshot, we have an angular light, a downward light on the female face here. Let's try one more on the male's face. Which one is it right here? Let's do another downward angle shot on the male face, but we're going to put a little bit more of the face in shadow. So let's first start by blocking in the shadow under the brow here. And we'll get the side of the nose. The cast shadow from the side of the nose will round out against the cheek like this. Something like this will be a drop shadow from the nose all the way down onto the lip. Much of the lip on the bottom will probably be in shadow. Something like this. Again, the entire inside of the mouth probably will be. Underneath the lip. Bottom of the mouth there. Do a large shadow off the jaw here. And what I want to show here is the type of shadow where you get more of the entire shape of the face like this. Something like that. And I'm just going to block all this in for now, but I also want to show you the effect of going back and erasing parts of your shadow. Alright, so under the jaw like this. And I'll just block all this in real quick. And I think this method for painting in the shadows with a larger brush really helps. I had a hard time, I still have a hard time with my shadows, but I had a hard time adding large bulks of shadow. I'd always want to just do a little bit of shading, a little bit of shadowing, and get away from it. You know, and I think that happens when you don't feel as confident with a certain part of your art. You just shy away from, you know, well, this is enough. I don't need to add any more. When really, you know, shadows are a really key part to telling the story and adding the mood. So you just have to go at it. Just have to really study it and really work at it. And believe me, I still got a lot to learn when it comes to shadows. But this technique has definitely given me a little bit more freedom to put them down. Okay, so now I've got a good amount in there. I can start to see the roundedness of the form. It's adding a bit of volume to the character. So now what I wanted to show you about doing it this way and blocking in a large areas like that, you don't necessarily have to leave it that way. Now if this looks right for the scene, then so be it. But if not, just take the erase, or come back with and traditional tools. I can't remember the name of it. It's and somebody can chime in the comment section below and let everybody know. But it's white ink. Sorry, I can't remember. But I don't do enough traditional work anymore to remember the names as much. But there are white inks that you can do. So if you're doing this traditionally, don't feel like this doesn't apply to you, because you just come back with a brush and some white ink and you can do exactly what I'm doing here. Pearl White, sorry, it just came back to me. I believe is one of them. Chime in if you know some other types, but Pearl White, and that might just be the name of one particular brand, but I do have some of that around the studio somewhere, and I've used that to do this type of effect on traditional art. So as you can see, I'm just kind of painting in. I can adjust my brush size and paint in some line work. And this is more something I do with the finish inking process. But it's nice to, if you feel like you blocked too much in and you're losing some of your form or your depth maybe, this is a good way to kind of bring that back. So I can just get in there and do little wrinkles and details, just like that. And if the overlap of the brush bothers you, you can just smudge that in just to take your eye off it. This is also a neat way to digitally paint. And that's one last thing I'll close on before I time-lapse this next part to refine these. I do recommend doing a little bit of digital painting or painting in general. It does help you with your shadows and with your highlights and things like that, because you're forced to create the entire thing out of value and light and dark. So I would say that if you're struggling with your line work to get your shadows right, you might want to mix it up a bit and try some painting. It's not going to be easy at first, but you'll start to understand light and shadow a lot more through that process. Okay, so I'll go ahead and time lapse this next part, and I'll add some Inkstar characters. Okay, so that'll conclude this video on shading the face. If you got any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments section below. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you like the content here so you can get future uploads. And always let me know what you think and what you'd like to see in the future. So, as always, keep drawing, keep having fun, and we'll talk to you soon.